My name is Erica Parker, and I'm 31. My whole life, my mother had one word for me in front of guests: lucky. Not talented, not earned, just lucky. The night my firm made me the youngest principal in its history, she said it again, louder, and lifted the gift my grandmother had brought me right out of my hands. "Save this for my real daughter," she told the room, smiling. "This one only got lucky." I let the silence sit. I didn't reach for it back. What none of them knew was that the one person everyone had written off as fragile had been paying attention for years and had already made a decision months before that no smile could undo. Then my grandmother set the gift down, took my hand, and said one thing. My mother went still on that stage. That was the moment everything began to turn. Let me tell you how it started. I'm Erica. This is the story of a house on a corner, a woman everyone underestimated, and the night the quietest person in my family turned out to be the one holding everything. But before the house became valuable, before anyone started measuring its yard or deciding who deserved it, there were years of smaller decisions that taught me exactly where I stood. We have to go back to the beginning, to a divorce I was too young to understand. I was 10 when my mother, Sharon, decided she was done with my father. I don't remember the fighting, because there wasn't much. That was the thing about my mother. She didn't rage. She reorganized. One spring, she was married to Daniel Parker, and by the next, she had folded him out of her life like an old coat she was giving away. My father drifted after that. He became a birthday card that came late, then a birthday card that came in the wrong month, then nothing at all. By the time I was in high school, he was a name I signed on forms and a phone number I stopped calling. 2 years after the divorce, my mother married Glenn Whitmore, and 2 years after that, she had Heather. I want you to understand something, because it's the whole shape of my childhood. When Heather arrived, my mother didn't just have a new daughter. She had a new life, and I was not in the photographs of it. I was the reminder of the marriage she wanted to forget. She never said that out loud. She didn't have to. It was in the small math of a house: who got the new coat and who got the hand-me-down, who got asked about their day, and who got asked to load the dishwasher. I learned the arithmetic early, and I stopped expecting it to add up in my favor. There's one dinner I still see clearly. I was 16. Glenn's parents were visiting, and my mother had made a real meal, the kind she saved for people she wanted to impress. Heather was 2, in a yellow dress, and she knocked over a full glass of grape juice across the good tablecloth. Everyone laughed. My mother wiped it up like it was charming. 20 minutes later, I reached for the bread and my elbow caught a spoon, and it clinked once against a plate. "Erica," my mother said. Just my name. But the way she said it, flat and tired, in front of Glenn's mother, I felt it in my spine. Heather spilled a whole glass and got a laugh. I moved a spoon and got a warning. I didn't cry about it. I remember I just filed it away, the way you file away a receipt you might need later. I was already becoming someone who kept records. There was another one, 2 years after the spoon. My high school graduation. I'd worked for it. I was near the top of my class, and I'd done it while holding down a part-time job. And some part of me still believed that if I'd just achieved enough, the arithmetic would finally tip. My mother came. She sat in the 3rd row. And when they called my name and I walked across that stage, I looked out and saw her looking down at her phone, thumbs moving, and Glenn beside her checking his watch. Heather. 4 was coloring. Afterward, in the parking lot, my mother's first words to me were, "We have to hurry. Heather has her recital at 4. Not, "I'm proud of you." Not, "Congratulations." Just a schedule. And I was the item on it that had run long. Heather's recital, I later learned, was a beginner dance class showcase where 20 children stood in a line and swayed. They filmed the whole thing. There is, Somewhere, a full video of Heather swaying. There is not one photograph of me crossing that stage. I checked, years later. I don't know why I checked. Maybe to confirm the thing I already knew, the way you press on a bruise. I didn't cry about that one either. I was getting good at not crying. I was getting good at a lot of things nobody was watching me get good at. The one place the arithmetic worked differently was my grandmother's house. Rose Parker was my father's mother, which meant that when my mother cut my father loose, she cut Rose loose too. Clean. My mother never called her again, never sent Heather over, never mentioned her at holidays. But Rose was mine in a way no one could reassign. She lived 25 minutes outside Columbus in a town called Ridgemont, in a little house she'd bought in 1979 on the corner of a quiet street, back when it was farmland and a 2-lane road. I started going there on my own the summer I turned 12. I'd take my bike, then later the bus, then later a car that coughed when it idled. Rose's porch was the first place I ever sat where I didn't have to ask permission to exist. She had a loose step on that porch, the second one up, that shifted under your weight. Every time I came, she'd say, "Mind the step," and every time eventually I'd bring a screwdriver and tighten it, and by my next visit it would be loose again. It became a joke between us. It became the thing I did. I fixed her steps so many times over the years that my hands knew the screws by feel. That step is going to matter. Hold on to it. When I turned 18, my mother gave me what she called a gift. I remember thinking for one foolish second that it might be money for school. Heather was 4 by then, and there was already a college fund with Heather's name on it. $75,000, my mother mentioned once at dinner, the way other people mention the weather. So part of me hoped. Part of me always hoped, right up until the moment hope got expensive. What my mother handed me was a folded sheet of paper. On it, in her neat handwriting, was a weekly list of errands, appointments, groceries, and repairs she had decided Rose needed. At the bottom, she had written where Rose kept the spare key. "Your grandmother's getting older," she said. "She needs somebody to look in on her. You don't have a lot going on. It should be you." You don't have a lot going on. I was 18, working 2 jobs, trying to figure out how to pay for a degree with no help. But in my mother's ledger, my life was empty space, and empty space is for other people's needs. I said, "Thank you." I actually said thank you. And then I did the thing she never expected, which was that I meant it, because she'd handed me Rose like a burden, and she had no idea she'd handed me the best thing I had. That's where the trouble started, and where I started too. I put myself through engineering school on loans and night shifts. $58,000, all in my name, no cosigner, no cushion. I studied structural engineering because I liked the idea of things that hold weight. Buildings, bridges, the invisible math that keeps a ceiling from coming down on people who never think about it. I liked being the reason something didn't fall. Those years were thin. I lived on a budget I taped to my refrigerator, a grid of numbers that told me exactly how many dollars I had for the week. I wore steel-toed boots to my job site that I resoled twice because new ones weren't in the grid. I ate the same 3 meals, and through all of it, once a week and often more, I drove 40 minutes each way to Ridgemont to see Rose. My family called it my job. Rose called it Tuesday. She kept a little notebook by her kitchen phone, and on the days I came, she wrote it down. Erica came. Just that. Years of Tuesdays in a spiral notebook, in her small, careful hand. I didn't know then how much those 2 words would end up meaning. There was a semester I almost didn't make it. My 3rd year, the numbers on the refrigerator stopped working. My car's clutch failed, and the repair quote was $1,100 I did not have. And without the car, I couldn't get to the job that paid for the loans that paid for the degree. I remember sitting on the floor of my apartment, doing the math over and over, as if doing it again would change the answer. I thought about dropping out. I thought about it seriously for 3 days. I didn't call my mother. I already knew, at 21, that asking for her help would cost me more than the clutch repair. She would have said, "Well, that's what happens when you take on more than you can handle." And she would have enjoyed saying it, and I would have owed her the enjoyment. So instead, I picked up a weekend shift at a warehouse, loading trucks in the dark before dawn, bought the clutch parts, and borrowed a friend's garage and tools. It took me 2 weekends to pull the transmission, replace the clutch, and put everything back together. My hands were cut up, but the car ran, and I stayed in school. Rose brought coffee, sat on a folding chair beside the open garage, and told me stories about her late husband, Emmett, who'd been a machinist and would have known exactly what to do. "You've got his hands," she told me, watching me work. I held on to that the way I held on to everything she gave me. It was the first inheritance anyone had ever offered me, and for years it was the only one I believed I would ever need. I met Marjorie Vance in those years, too. She lived in the house next to Rose's, a widow in her 70s, with a screened porch and a habit of noticing everything on the street. The first time we really talked, she looked at me over her fence and said, "You're the one who actually comes." Like it was rare, like she'd been keeping her own count. I didn't think much of it then. Marjorie counting was going to matter later, but that Tuesday it was just a kind thing a neighbor said. Then, in 2016, I got hired at Ashford Lund. Ashford Lund was a structural engineering firm downtown, the kind of place where the lobby had my degree's worth of awards on the wall, and everyone talked in a shorthand I had to learn fast. I came in at the bottom. Junior engineer, the one who checks other people's work and gets none of the credit. But I was good, and I was patient, and I had spent my whole life learning how to be overlooked, while still doing the job right. I called my mother the day I got the offer. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Hope, still. She didn't say congratulations. She said, "That's good timing, actually. Glenn and I want to take Heather to the coast in August. Any chance you could stay at your grandmother's that week?" I stood in my apartment, holding the phone, looking at my taped-up budget, and I said yes. Because it wasn't about the trip. It was Rose. It was always going to be Rose. And that was the difference between me and my mother that she never understood. I would show up for people whether or not it helped me. I want to be honest about something, because I promised you honesty. It wasn't all quiet endurance. There were years in there where I doubted myself badly, where I wondered if my mother was right, if I really was just the lucky one, the backup, the daughter who'd been born into the wrong chapter. That doubt was the real weight, heavier than the loans. But you build the same way you keep a building standing, one load at a time. My first real chance at Ashford Lund came about 2 years in, and it came disguised as someone else's mistake. The senior engineer assigned to a mid-rise project had already signed off on the drawings, and I was doing the final check. Nobody expected to uncover anything. I found something. A connection detail was too weak for the load it would eventually carry. The kind of quiet error that can sit inside a building for years before one bad day exposes it. I flagged it. I wrote it up carefully, with the numbers, and I sent it to my lead. The drawings were corrected before construction. The building was safer, and the senior engineer walked into the next project meeting and described the catch as proof of his own diligence and his team's rigor. He said, "We," a lot. He never once said my name. I sat in that meeting and felt the old, familiar temperature drop. Spill a glass, get a laugh, move a spoon, get your name said like a warning. Save a building, watch someone else say, "we." Here's what I did with it. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry in the stairwell, though I wanted to. Instead, I started keeping copies. Every drawing I checked, every calculation I ran, every email. I saved it, dated, in my own name. I told myself it was professional habit. It was also something older than that. I was the girl who filed away receipts. I just had better filing now. Remember that habit? It's another screw I was tightening over and over, without knowing yet what it would hold up. Not every step was forward. About a year after the catch on the mid-rise, a project I'd poured 6 months into got killed. The client lost financing, and the whole thing evaporated overnight, and with it went the promotion timeline I'd let myself imagine. I'd worked weekends on that job. I'd missed 2 Tuesdays for it, and I'd felt guilty both times. Then the project vanished overnight, leaving me with nothing to show for the work and 2 visits with Rose I could never get back. I sat in a stairwell that afternoon and let myself feel, for about 10 minutes, that maybe my mother was right. Maybe I was just the one who worked hard and got nowhere. Maybe effort was its own kind of luck, and I didn't have it. Then I drove to Ridgemont, and Rose took one look at me and put the kettle on and said, "Tell me what fell down." And I did. And she listened the way she always listened, without fixing, and at the end she said, "A building isn't the 6 months you spent on the one that didn't get built. It's all of them. You're still standing. Keep going." So I kept going. That's the whole secret, if there is one. I kept going on the days it would have been reasonable to stop. Around then, Rose started to slow down. I noticed it in small ways first. She held the porch railing a beat longer. She'd tell me a story she'd told me the week before, and I'd let her because who cares? Let an old woman tell a good story twice. But I also started doing more, bringing groceries, sorting her mail, sitting with her longer. The visits stopped being visits and started being care, and I never once resented it, and I want to be honest that my family never once offered to share it. Not one weekend, not one grocery run. The daughter with nothing going on had it covered, so why would they? By 2023, I paid off the last of the $58,000. The catch on the mid-rise had made me visible at Ashford Lund, even if someone else took the credit for it out loud. Gordon Ballard, it turned out, had known. He'd read the write-up. He'd seen whose name was on the calculations before the "we" got layered over the top of it. He started handing me harder work. A parking structure with a geometry problem 3 other engineers had walked away from. A hospital wing that had to be retrofitted while it stayed open, which is the kind of job where a mistake isn't a lawsuit, it's a ceiling coming down on a patient. I did them. I did them well. I stopped being the junior who checks the work and became the one they gave the work nobody else wanted to sign their name to. None of that came from luck. It came from 10,000 small hours, a willingness to be the last one in the office, and the same stubbornness that had kept me working through 2 cold weekends in a borrowed garage. But I want you to hold both things at once, because the story does. At work, I was becoming someone. At home, in the family I was born into, I was still the folded chore list. I could carry a hospital wing and still not get a congratulations for a promotion. Both were true at the same time. That's the part that breaks you if you let it. Being solid everywhere except the one place you first learned to want to be solid. I remember the exact moment the balance hit 0. I was sitting in my car in the Ashford Lund parking garage, and I looked at the screen, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light, like I'd been carrying a backpack full of bricks for years, and someone had finally let me set it down. No one in my family knew. There was no one to tell who would have understood what it cost. So I drove to Ridgemont. Rose made tea we both let go, cold, and I told her. And she took my hand across the kitchen table and said, "I never worried about you. Your mother worried you'd need her. That's not the same as worrying about you." That was Rose. She could say the truest thing in the plainest voice. By then, the changes were harder to dismiss. Rose still knew exactly what she wanted, but groceries became heavier, appointments became more frequent, and the stairs took more out of her. I quietly rearranged my weeks around those needs. The rest of the family surfaced only to remind me that caring for her was supposedly my responsibility. Late in 2024, my mother called, and I knew before I answered that it wasn't to ask how I was. It was to tell me Heather had gotten her license, and they had bought her a car. $32,000, she said, with real pride, the way you'd announce good news. I had called her weeks earlier to tell her I was leading my first project team. She'd said, that's nice, and immediately changed the subject to Heather's new car. $32,000 for a car for the real daughter, a folded chore list for the lucky one. I didn't say any of that. I said congratulations to Heather, and I hung up and I sat in the quiet for a while. Then, in February of 2025, a letter came to Rose's house. I was there when she opened it, standing at her counter with the light coming in low. It was from a company called Halverson Development, and it was an offer to buy her house, her corner lot, the little place she'd bought in 1979 for $31,000. The number in the letter was $1,350,000. Rose read it twice. Her hands were shaking, not with excitement, but with something closer to fear. Ridgemont wasn't farmland anymore. A retail corridor had grown up along that road, and developers were quietly buying corner parcels to assemble bigger sites, and Rose's little lot sat exactly where somebody's big plan needed it to be. She set the letter down and looked at me. I don't want to sell, Erica, she said. I want to die in my kitchen. Is that allowed? I told her of course it was allowed. It was her house, her choice. I believed that completely. I had no idea how many people were about to disagree. Because tucked into the envelope, clipped to the offer, was a business card. Nolan Reed, Acquisitions, Halverson Development. I didn't think anything of it. Just a name on a card. That card is a seed. Watch where it grows. In April, Rose fell. It wasn't a bad fall. She caught the edge of the counter and went down slow and bruised her hip and scared herself. She spent 2 nights in the hospital for observation. The doctors monitored her for a head injury and any temporary cognitive changes, routine caution after a fall, but exactly the kind of language a family like mine could bend into something uglier. Rose wasn't confused. I want to be very clear because it becomes the center of everything. Her body was 79. Her mind was a blade. But she fell, and they're checking her memory is a sentence that can be bent, and my mother has always been good at bending sentences. Because the day after Rose was admitted, my mother showed up at the hospital. I hadn't called her. Marjorie hadn't called her. I still don't know how she heard, except that Ridgemont is a small town, and Marjorie had mentioned the offer letter to someone at church, and word about a $1.35 million corner lot travels fast. My mother arrived with a store-bought fruit basket and a phone already halfway to her own face, taking a photo of herself adjusting Rose's blanket. I watched her post it. Family is everything. Praying for my sweet Rose. She hadn't spoken to her former mother-in-law in 20 years. She barely looked at Rose. She spent most of the visit in the hallway, on the phone, and I caught pieces of it. Corner lot, assembly, the developer says. She wasn't at the hospital because someone she loved had fallen. She was there because a valuable property had an elderly owner she thought she might be able to declare incapable, and she wanted to position herself before anyone stopped her. At one point, she came back into the room and sat on the edge of Rose's bed and took Rose's hand. And I watched Rose's eyes, and Rose let her, the way you let a stranger do a thing that costs you nothing, all the while knowing exactly who they are. She's getting confused, my mother told the nurse loudly in the hall. We're going to need to get her affairs managed. I'm family. I stood in the doorway of that hospital room and felt something cold and clear settle over me. My mother hadn't come because Rose fell. She had come because her former mother-in-law owned a corner lot worth $1.33 million, and Sharon believed that calling Rose confused could create a path from that property to her own pocket. That was the night everything changed, though the change was invisible for a while. Because my mother left the hospital thinking she'd started something. She had no idea Rose was about to finish it. Rose had seen the fruit basket performance and heard every word through the half-open door. She had been quieter than my mother, but she had not missed anything. And Rose, 79 and sharp as a blade, decided she was not going to be managed. 2 days after she got home, she asked Marjorie for the name of a lawyer, not a big firm. A local elder law attorney named Eleanor Voss, the kind who has seen every version of this story and is tired of watching it end the same way. I only found out because Rose asked me to drive her, and she didn't tell me where until we were in the car. I sat in Eleanor Voss's small office while Rose explained what she wanted, and I felt my stomach drop because I understood immediately what my mother was setting up and what Rose was setting up to stop it. "I want to give the house to Erica," Rose said. "Now, while there's no question I'm in my right mind. And I want a letter from my doctor that says exactly that, dated the same day, so no one can come along later and claim I didn't know what I was doing." I said, "No, I want you to know that." My first word was no. "Rose, I don't want the house. If you give it to me, they'll say I took it. They'll say I'm just like her, circling you for money. I can't." Rose looked at me for a long moment. Then she said the sentence I've carried ever since. "Erica, I know you don't want it. That is exactly why I'm giving it to you." Eleanor Voss explained the mechanics in plain language, the way I'm going to explain them to you because they matter and they're simpler than people think. A competent owner can transfer her own property if the decision is voluntary and the deed is properly executed. A relative could still challenge it later by alleging incapacity, coercion, fraud, or undue influence, so Eleanor wanted the record to answer those claims before anyone made them. That meant getting the medical letter. You get the doctor to confirm capacity on the same date in writing, and you record the deed. You file it publicly with the county, so it's not a secret in a drawer. It's done. It's real. It's on the record. That's what we did in April of 2025. Rose signed a deed transferring the property to me while reserving her legal right to live there for the rest of her life. Dr. Claire Bennett, a geriatric specialist, examined Rose that same day and documented that she fully understood the transfer. Eleanor Voss then recorded the deed with the county. Rose updated her will that afternoon and signed new financial and medical powers of attorney, naming me, making it explicit that Sharon had no authority to act for her. The legal title to the corner house was mine, and Rose's right to remain there was protected for life. Almost no one knew. I drove home that night not feeling like I'd won something, feeling like I was holding something heavy and breakable, wrapped in a blanket, that I would have to protect. I want you to feel that with me, because you knew something my mother did not. She was about to spend months trying to take a house that had already, quietly, stopped being anyone's to take but mine. And while Sharon kept moving as if she controlled the board, I let her. The documents were already recorded. All I had to do was watch how far she was willing to go before the truth reached her. If you've ever been handed someone else's burden as if your own life mattered less, when did you realize that showing up was not weakness, but proof of who you were becoming? Share it in the comments if putting it into words feels right. Through the spring and summer, my mother worked her plan, and she had no idea the ground had already moved. She started visiting Rose, suddenly, after 20 years. She'd bring soup she didn't make and stay for an hour and text me afterward about how worried she was, how Rose really shouldn't be alone, how we as a family needed to think about the house. I knew what the house meant now. It meant $1.33 million. Marjorie, next door, saw all of it. After Eleanor advised us to preserve direct observations, Marjorie began keeping a notebook, dates, license plates, who arrived, and how long they stayed. She noticed that Nolan Reed's car appeared on the same afternoons my mother's did. Sharon had apparently told him she was handling the property for Rose because the two of them walked the boundary together, pointing at the yard as if the owner's consent were already a formality. "She's got that developer out here twice a week," Marjorie told me over the fence one evening. "And your mother, measuring a yard that isn't hers." I thanked her. I didn't tell her the yard was mine now. Not yet. Some cards you hold until the table's full. Then, in November, 2 things happened in the same week. The first, Ashford Lund made me a principal, the youngest in the firm's history. My salary went to $165,000, but the number wasn't the thing. The thing was Gordon Ballard, the managing principal, a man who did not hand out praise, standing up in front of the whole office and saying, "We should have promoted Erica a year ago. Frankly, we're lucky she stayed." Lucky. He used the word, and for the first time in my life, it landed right side up. He didn't mean I'd stumbled into something. He meant the firm was fortunate to have me. Same word my mother had used to make me small. In his mouth, it meant the opposite. They scheduled a party to announce it formally. Friday, December 5th in the evening, at the firm. Colleagues, partners, clients, a stage, a little podium, the whole thing. The second thing that happened that week, my mother called me, and her voice was sweet in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I heard about your promotion," she said. "That's wonderful, honey." She had never once called me honey. "Listen, since the whole family's going to be together for your party, Grandma's coming, isn't she? I think it's the perfect time to just sit down and settle the house situation. Get it done before Christmas. Nolan says the offer won't sit forever." Nolan. She was on a first-name basis with the developer buying a house she didn't own. "Settle it how?" I asked. "You get Rose to sign, we sell, and we divide the proceeds as a family," she said, like she was doing me a favor. "You just got promoted. You don't need to look greedy by blocking a sale your grandmother could benefit from while everyone is celebrating you." There it was, the threat dressed as concern. She said she would bring the sale papers to the party and expected me to commit that night before the offer expired at Christmas. If I protected Rose, she would frame me as the greedy one holding the family back. She'd flipped it so completely that in her version, I was the villain and she was the family. I didn't argue. I've told you that's my way, and it is. But this time, it was strategy. I said, "Let's talk at the party." She thought she'd won. I could hear it in her goodbye. She thought I'd folded. What she didn't know was that I'd just agreed to have this conversation exactly where I wanted it. In front of witnesses, on the record, on a stage. Let me tell you how I got ready, because I didn't leave this to chance. I called Eleanor Voss and asked her to come to the party, not as a threat, as a guest with a folder. I asked Dr. Bennett's office for a copy of the capacity letter. I asked Marjorie if she'd come and bring her notebook. I made copies of the recorded deed, the public one, the one anyone could pull from the county themselves. And I found out something in those 2 weeks that turned my stomach. I was in Eleanor Voss's office on a gray afternoon, going over how the party would go, when she slid a printed page across the desk and said, "You should see this. It changes the shape of things." It was an email chain Nolan Reed had forwarded to Eleanor after a routine title search showed that Sharon did not own the property and had no authority to negotiate its sale. My mother had been writing to him for months, since April, the week Rose fell. I read it twice, the way Rose had read the offer letter, my hands doing the same thing hers had done. My mother had told Reed she could deliver the property. She'd used that phrase, deliver, like Rose's home was a package. She'd discussed a private facilitation fee, a commission for herself on top of the family share she planned to demand, for, in her words, handling the family side and the grandmother. Handling the grandmother, that was the phrase. In the same weeks, she'd been telling our relatives and a hospital nurse and anyone who'd listen that Rose was too confused to manage her own affairs. So here was the whole design, laid out on Eleanor's desk. Brand her own mother-in-law senile. Sell the house that senility would let her manage. Take a private cut from the sale, then demand another share of the proceeds under the name of family and call the whole thing concern. None of it holds up, Eleanor said, almost gently. She had no authority, no power of attorney. The deed was recorded in April. Legally, she was negotiating the sale of a house that already belonged to you. But you asked me to be honest about what I found, and this is what I found. I sat with it for a night. I didn't sleep much, not because I was afraid. The documents made fear pointless. But because there's a particular grief in seeing, in black and white, exactly how little you were worth to someone who was supposed to love you. It's one thing to feel it your whole life. It's another to read it in an email where you're a line item under handling the grandmother. The next morning, I put the printout in the folder with everything else. The deed, the capacity letter, Marjorie's notebook. The whole quiet architecture of the truth, assembled the way I assembled everything, one dated page at a time. The night before the party, I drove out to Ridgemont one more time. It was cold, the kind of December cold that makes the porch light look small. Rose was inside making tea. I stood on her steps, and I crouched down, and I took out the screwdriver I still kept in my glove box, and I tightened the loose second step. One more time. My hands knew the screws by feel. Rose opened the door and watched me. "You've been fixing that step for 19 years, she said. "It keeps coming loose." "No," she said. "You keep coming back." She held the door open. "Come inside, it's freezing." And then, as I passed her, "Tomorrow, let me be the one to say it. Whatever happens, let it come from me." I didn't ask what she meant. I trusted her. That was the whole thing between us in the end. I trusted her, and she'd earned it, one Tuesday at a time. Inside, over tea that went cold the way our tea always did, she asked me one question. "Are you sure you want it to happen there, in front of your people?" She wasn't worried for herself. She was worried for me. That a public unmasking might cost me something at the firm, might make me the woman with the dramatic family instead of the youngest principal in its history. I'd thought about it. "She chose the room," I said. "She decided to use my promotion party to pressure me into settling the house because she thought I would never challenge her in front of my firm. I wasn't planning a spectacle. I only wanted the documents and the people behind them present, so if she forced the issue publicly, the truth would not depend on my word against hers." Rose nodded slowly. "Emmett would have liked you," she said. "He never raised his voice either. He just made sure he was right, and then he waited." She reached over and patted my hand. "You're going to be all right, Erica. You've been all right for a long time. Tomorrow's just the day everybody else finds out." I drove home under a cold, clear sky, and I didn't feel nervous. I felt the way I feel on a job site the morning of a big pour, when all the math is done and checked and there's nothing left but to let it happen. The facts had been checked. Whatever happened next, I knew exactly what the documents could carry and where the truth would stand. The party was on the 40th floor, in a room with glass on two sides, and the city lit up beyond it. I want you to see it the way I did, because everything that mattered happened in that light. My colleagues were there. Gordon Ballard, clients I'd worked years to earn. And near the front, in a chair Marjorie had helped her to, sat Rose, in the blue dress she saved for weddings and funerals, a wrapped gift in her lap. Eleanor Voss stood near the back with a leather folder, looking like any other guest. Marjorie sat beside Rose with her handbag on her knees. And then my mother arrived, with Glenn a half step behind her and Heather trailing behind them, young and uncomfortable in heels. My mother wore the smile she wears for rooms she intends to run. Gordon said a few words, kind ones, about the catch on the mid-rise, about how I'd earned every inch of this. People clapped. And then Rose stood up, slowly, with her gift, and the room turned toward the old woman in the blue dress, and I saw my mother move. She crossed the floor fast, still smiling. Seeing Rose carry a wrapped gift after weeks of arguing about the house, she must have assumed it contained money or papers. She took it from Rose's hands before Rose could give it to me, turned toward my colleagues and clients, and said in her warmest voice, "Save this for my real daughter." She laughed lightly. This one only got lucky. The room went quiet in that specific way. A room goes quiet when it senses something is wrong, but doesn't know what yet. I felt the old temperature drop. 14 years old, a spoon against a plate, my name said like a warning. I didn't reach for the gift. I didn't defend myself. I had learned a long time ago not to fight for scraps. Rose set the gift down on the table beside her, gently, like it was the least important thing in the room. She took my hand. Her grip was dry and warm and completely steady. And she said it, clear enough for the front three rows to hear. "The house has been Erica's since April, Sharon. You've been trying to sell something you never owned and were never authorized to represent." My mother's smile didn't fall right away. It flickered, the way a light flickers before it goes. "Mom," Sharon said, a word she had not used for Rose in 20 years. "You're confused. Let me explain." "I'm not confused," Rose said, "and you're going to stop saying that I am." Rose nodded to Eleanor, giving the permission they had agreed on beforehand. Eleanor stepped forward, introduced herself as Rose's attorney, and opened the leather folder. She shared only the documents Rose had authorized her to disclose, calmly and without raising her voice. A deed, transferring the house to me, recorded with the county in April. A letter from Dr. Claire Bennett, a geriatric specialist, dated the same day, documenting that Rose understood the property transfer, its consequences, and the people involved. "Anyone in this room," Eleanor said pleasantly, "can pull the deed from the county themselves. It's public. It's been public for 8 months. My mother's face was doing something I had never seen it do. My whole life I'd watched her talk her way out of rooms. I had never once seen her go silent. She went silent now. Marjorie stood and held up her notebook. "I live next door," she said. "For years, Erica came every week. Sharon appeared only after the offer arrived, usually with Nolan Reed. I watched them walk the property line together, and I recorded every date." She handed the notebook to Eleanor instead of performing the rest for the room. She didn't have to say the rest, but Eleanor said it, quietly, because it needed to be on the record. "Mr. Reed forwarded us his correspondence with Mrs. Whitmore after the title search revealed that she had no ownership or authority. Those messages discuss paying her a fee for delivering this property." The room understood all at once. You could feel it move through the crowd, my colleagues, my boss, the clients. The understanding that this woman in the running the room smile had come to a celebration of my work to publicly brand me lucky and undeserving while she was privately trying to sell her former mother-in-law's house without her consent and pocket a cut. My mother looked around the room for an ally and found none. And then she made the mistake people like her always make. She reached for the only thing she had left, which was the money, and she said it out loud. "But it's $1.35 million. Her voice cracked on the number. "Do you understand what you're throwing away? Over an old house?" There it was. The truth, in her own mouth, in front of everyone. Not concern for Rose. Not family. A number. Behind her, Glenn took one small step back, then another. I couldn't tell whether he was shocked by what Sharon had done or simply afraid of being associated with it. Either way, when the room turned against her, he stopped standing at her side. I could have said a lot of things. I'd rehearsed a lot of things, over a lot of Tuesdays. I said one. "It was never luck," I told her. "It was every late night at work, and every Tuesday I still came back." Rose squeezed my hand, and then she said the thing that I'll keep for the rest of my life, low, just for me, though a few people heard it. "I wanted them to hear it here," she said, "in the room full of people who already know what you're worth." The room had heard the truth, but the public reveal was not the conversation I had been avoiding all my life. That came afterward, away from Rose, the documents, and everyone who had finally seen my mother clearly. The party ended the way those things do, in a blur of people not knowing what to say and saying it anyway. Gordon walked past me and put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You handled that with more grace than she deserved," and moved on, because there was nothing else to say. I found my mother in the parking garage. I hadn't gone looking for her exactly. I'd gone looking for air, but she was standing beside her car while Glenn waited behind the wheel with the engine running. Whether he was ashamed, angry, or simply unwilling to face me, he had left Sharon to handle the consequences alone. She turned when she heard me, and I watched her cycle through it, fast, the way she always did. First, the blame. "You humiliated me in there, in front of everyone. Do you know what people are going to say?" I didn't answer. Then, the pity. "I'm your mother, Erica. Everything I did for this family. You wouldn't understand. You never had children. You don't know what it's like to have a real daughter," I said. It came out quiet. She flinched. Then the thing underneath all of it, the thing she actually wanted. "I made one mistake. One. And you're going to shut your own mother out over one mistake? And that's the word I want you to hear, because it's the word people like her always reach for. Mistake. Singular. As if it were one bad afternoon. A mistake is one choice," I said. "You made the same choice for 20 years. You made it at a dinner table when I was 16. You made it when you handed me a chore list instead of a college fund. You made it every time you called only when you needed something. You made it in a hospital hallway in April when you called your former mother-in-law confused and then kept making it for months while you negotiated with a developer behind her back. That's not a mistake. A mistake is an accident. That was a decision you kept making because it kept working. It just stopped working tonight." She tried once more to find the version of the story where she was the one who'd been wronged. "I gave you a place to live. I fed you. I clothed you. I raised you." "You did," I said. And I meant it because it was true, and because the truth was the only weapon I'd ever needed with her. "You met the minimum. That's the floor, not the ceiling. You gave me food and a place to sleep, but you made sure I understood it was obligation. Heather you delighted in. Me you maintained. A child knows the difference. I knew it at 14. I knew it at my own graduation when you checked your watch. She didn't have anything for that. For the first time in my life, my mother had nothing to say to me. There was a small sound behind me. Heather stood between the concrete pillars, still in her heels, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She had heard some of it, perhaps all of it. "I didn't know," she said, and for the first time that night, she sounded younger than she looked. "I knew Mom treated us differently. I didn't understand how far it went. I'm sorry I never looked closely enough." I looked at her for a moment. She wasn't the one who'd made the choices. She was just the one they'd been made for. "You didn't do it," I told her. "Just when you're older and you get to decide how you treat people. Remember, there was a version of the family that didn't have to be this." She nodded and she cried a little, and I didn't hug her because we weren't there and pretending we were would have been a lie. But I meant what I said. The chain can end at whoever decides to put it down. I turned back to my mother one more time. "If you have something genuinely necessary to say about Rose, send it through Eleanor. Do not contact Rose about the house, and do not come to the property without being invited. That's the whole door." I didn't slam it. I just made it small enough that she couldn't fit her whole self through it anymore. And then I walked back to my grandmother, who was waiting by the elevator in her blue dress, and I took her home. A few weeks later, in the last days of December, I moved. Not far. I gave up my apartment in the city and took a place 10 minutes from Ridgemont, so that the 40-minute drive I'd made 1,000 times became a short one, and some days, no drive at all. I renovated the downstairs room in the house whose title now carried my name, but whose life still belonged to Rose, so she would no longer need to use the stairs. I hired a part-time companion named Cora to help with meals, errands, and the hours I couldn't be there. She and Rose argue over card games now, which sounds like a life continuing, not a burden being managed. I called Nolan Reed myself. I told him the house wasn't for sale. He was polite about it. Developers usually are, until they aren't. Then I asked whether the narrow corner strip had value to his assembly without the house. After a survey, zoning review, and county approval confirmed that separating it would not affect the home's access, utilities, or setbacks, I sold only that strip. The proceeds were enough to fund Rose's care while preserving the house, the porch, and her right to remain there. Sharon had seen a number. I looked for the smallest change that would protect the life already rooted there. I started seeing a therapist on Thursdays, too. There were things no deed, document, or confrontation could repair for me, and I was finally ready to work on them. There are things a folder full of documents can't tighten. I'm working on those. At the office, there's a junior engineer named Dana who reminds me of myself at that age. Capable, careful, and too accustomed to watching louder people speak first. Last month, I put her name on a catch she made, out loud, in a meeting, in front of everyone. She looked at me like I'd handed her something. Maybe I had. Not success, but the relief of hearing her own name attached to her own work. That was something I could choose to pass forward. I hung the gift on the wall of Rose's kitchen. It was a photograph, it turned out. The one Rose had wrapped for me. The one my mother tried to take. It's an old picture of the two of us on the porch. Me, maybe 7, gap-toothed, sitting on that second step. Rose had it framed. On the back, in her handwriting, she'd written the date she signed the deed, and one line, "For the one who kept coming back." Next to it now hangs a new photo. Same porch, same step, tight under our feet these days. Rose and me, this past Christmas, both of us older, both of us home. Sometimes I sit on that repaired step and think about the word my mother used to make me smaller. Lucky. She was wrong about everything except this. I was lucky to have one person who saw me clearly and kept the porch light on. Everything else I built. Rose spent 19 years showing me that belonging was never something Sharon had the authority to grant or take away. If you've ever been overlooked, asked to sacrifice, or left to rebuild a life no one else believed in, I hope this story reminded you that showing up for yourself still counts. If sharing feels right, what burden were you once handed that eventually led you towards something worth keeping?